Up next, coverage of a lecture sponsored by the Natural Resources Defense Council. The focus is on The Turning Point, an environmental vision for the 1990s. The featured speaker, William Reilly, the administrator of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency.
We've just opened perhaps one of the first prototypes of an energy-efficient office building, our own office building in New York City. We have a series of new projects, which many of which you know about. You're all aware of the ALAR project, the Mothers and Others project, which had such an impact this year, the Soviet nuclear verification project, which indeed has opened up new lines of contact with the Soviet government and the Soviet National Academy. Our project on chlorofluorocarbons, the Clean Air project, the Energy Efficiency project, which is going along great guns, just to name a very few. I think it's very fitting that we should be here this evening in the headquarters of Intelsat, and I want to thank the Director General of Intelsat, Dean Birch, very much for making this excellent room available to us and for introducing us to the world of tomorrow. I think it's not pretentious to say that we share with Intelsat at least two things: a growing global reach to all the programs we have, and a confident orientation to tomorrow in the work we're doing. Now, just one more word to introduce the introducer. Tonight we have Honorable Russ Train to introduce our honored guest, Bill Reilly. Most of you here know Russ personally, so there isn't much I have to say about him. You know about his work as the chairman of the Council on Environmental Quality, and later as the administrative and Environmental Protection Agency. You know about his work as the chairman, president, and then chairman of the Conservation Foundation World Wildlife. You may not know that he was for years an honored trustee of NRDC, and you may have forgotten that he was the first person honored to give the Marshall Lecture. With that, with no more, may I introduce the Honorable Russell Train.
Okay, we'll hope for the best. Thank you, Bob, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Frankly, I don't know how they could have forgotten the first Marshall Lecture. And my recollection is that that was in 1983, and that Bill Reilly is the 7th, not the 8th Marshall Lecturer, and he's also the 7th administrator of EPA. So that may tell something to you all. The first thing you need to know about the job of administrator of EPA is that it is about the most frustrating, impossible job any human being could possibly have. The second thing you've got to know is, at least in my experience, it's the greatest job any human being could ever have. Now, Bill probably hasn't been there long enough to share all those sentiments, but I suspect he will in time. One thing that makes the job a little less frustrating, a little less impossible, no more exciting, is to make EPA a Department of the Environment. And I honestly hope that that is going to be on the agenda of this country in the near future. It is high time that It is high time that EPA took its place as a full-fledged cabinet department. The President's selection of Bill as EPA administrator, I think, really was universally applauded. And with close to 20 years experience as a member of the staff of the Council on Environmental Quality, as executive director of the Task Force on Land Use and Urban Growth, as president of the Conservation Foundation, as president of the World Wildlife Fund, Bill had absolutely outstanding environmental credentials for the job. The president's initiative in sending a clean air package to the Congress broke a legislative logjam of long standing. And on the international front, Bill Reilly has played a prominent role in the growing debate on CFCs and global climate change, among other environmental issues. Now, I suspect we may be hearing more about that subject this evening. Jim Marshall, for whom these lectures are named, was said to be a man possessed of a vision of humans living in harmony with their environment and with hope for a great world movement to make it happen. Bill Reilly will now address us on the topic, The Turning Point, an environmental vision for the 90s. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Bill.
Thank you very much, Russ, for a very kind and generous introduction. You know, I started work at the Council on Environmental Quality in 1970 and had the great good fortune to have as my boss Russell Train. And I have made it a practice ever since to take no job that he has not already filled. Every job I have had since late 1973, Russ has been a predecessor. And it is said that no one is a hero to his successor. But I can tell you that there is an exception to that in my life and experience, and it is Russell Train. I very much appreciate being here in the presence of so many friends and colleagues, Bob Blake and John Adams, and all of you who are making such a unique contribution to the nation's environment. This organization, NRDC, has been referred to as the shadow EPA. And I can tell you that I understand what that means. I understand and appreciate what that means. I think that NRDC contributes in countless ways to the effectiveness of EPA, to sharpening our edge, and to helping us do better the job the country expects of us. Well, I am very pleased to follow Russ Train once again and to deliver the Marshall Lecture. Now, some might be content to hold a job like this and count themselves successful if they manage to stay out of Jack Anderson or stay out of Nordwag. I should have done that, I think. Or stay out of court, or just stay out of jail. For the record, I do hope to stay out of jail, but for the rest, I have no illusions whatever. As for staying out of court, I am, as of this evening, a named defendant in 489 lawsuits. That number may be a record high for the agency. Well, be that as it may, I want to be involved in more lawsuits still, as initiator and as plaintiff. Last February, I promised the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee I would conduct a management review of Superfund, our largest, certainly our most controversial program. And in my review, I established two key priorities for the future direction of that program. First, an emphasis on innovative cleanup technologies. And second, a priority for enforcement. Vigorous, aggressive, predictable, and unavoidable enforcement to guide implementation of that program and to reshape the incentives for negotiation and voluntary cleanup by all parties responsible for waste in Superfund sites. While I'm on the subject of enforcement, let me share some good news with you tonight. Our emphasis on enforcement produced a record or near record year for every major category of enforcement in the fiscal year just ended. The agency referred 364 civil judicial cases addressing violations of environmental laws to the Department of Justice for prosecution, just short of the agency record set in fiscal year '88. Our criminal enforcement program referred a record total of 60 criminal cases to justice last year, and we issued 4,017 administrative orders, also an agency record. As these figures indicate, I am determined to instill an enforcement-first ethic in all of EPA's major regulatory programs. So I want to be in court, and I have every confidence that NRDC will help me stay in court. NRDC, by the way, played a particularly important role in my formation at EPA. Scarcely 3 weeks after President Bush swore me in last February, Al Meyerhoff, Laurie Mott, and my other friends at NRDC dropped by and said, "Welcome to EPA, Bill. Here's an apple." Well, I've been presented with any manner of various stages of ripeness since that time, and I trust we are learning better and we are improving the tools that we have to deal with problems when we confront them. The pesticide reforms, I must say, are a direct response to what I learned about the astonishing weaknesses and inadequacies of the nation's pesticide programs. Almost 10 months into my term, it seems to me that this year finds this nation and much of the world at a turning point with regard to the environment. There is something distinctly new about our situation. 2 weeks ago, I spent more than an hour with Chancellor Helmut Kohl on the eve of his historic visit to a democratic Poland. His mind was on the environment, about which he said, "The economy must adapt to environmental priorities, not as a matter just of political necessity, but as a matter of morality. One does not have to be a green in order to understand and to act." In Europe, as in the United States, public concern for the environment has never been higher. Expectations of governments have rarely, if ever, I think, been greater. And the opportunity to make real and lasting progress is surely as near as it has been for many, many years, within reach almost of our hands. It sometimes seems to me that we can respond to virtually all the environmental imperatives that press in upon us, provided they don't require significant new federal money. The federal budget deficit is the dark cloud that hovers over anyone in public life today. But though it is omnipresent and constraining, there is much that we can do, much that President Bush has already done to improve the environment significantly, even in spite of the deficit. Consider the Clean Air Act the President proposed in June, or the comprehensive reform of the pesticide laws he proposed in October, or the new rules to restrict benzene or phase out asbestos that I ordered last summer, or the President's new policy to order a phase out of ozone-destroying CFCs by the end of the century, or the ban on imports of elephant ivory, or the many opportunities that will be presented in the new Farm Bill and the National Energy Strategy. How should we confront this moment? Well, the first thing we should do is to take stock of how far we've come, how much progress we have made as a nation since the early 1970s, when our national legislative strategy for the environment was conceived. A couple of months ago, I participated in a conference which considered a report on the Great Lakes prepared by the Conservation Foundation and the Canadian Institute for Research on Public Policy. In many ways, I see the Great Lakes as a symbol of where we are with respect to the environment in the United States as we enter the decade of the 1990s. The report documented the continuing pollution problems with the lakes, 42 toxic hotspots that would require tens of billions of dollars to clean up, fish bioaccumulating toxins in their tissue, PCBs, and even DDT finding their way into the lakes. pesticides, herbicides, and petroleum running off of farms and city streets into ditches and streams and wending their way into the lakes. Now that's the bad news, and it's all true. But the good news is that both Canada and the United States got good value from the huge investments both nations have made since the 1972 Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement was signed. Close to $10 billion has been spent on wastewater treatment plants, more than $8 billion of that by the United States. 90% of those plants are functioning effectively, providing secondary treatment, and the remaining 10% are under court order to upgrade. Progress is measurable, undeniable, indisputable. Fecal coliform is down, nutrients are down, algae are down, biological oxygen demand is down. 20 years ago, it looked doubtful there would be any fish at all in Lake Erie, and now there are plenty. I don't want to claim too much. Bill Ruckelshaus set the standard for modest credit taking at EPA one day during his second tour as administrator, harking back to the time in 1968 when the Cuyahoga River caught fire near Erie, Lake Erie. He said that, well, the waters may not be fishable or swimmable yet, but at least they're no longer flammable. Well, that's not a bad metaphor for our first 2 decades at EPA. We have put out a lot of fires, and many more will not occur because a vigorous agency staffed with skillful and uncommonly committed people has been effective at the delicate business of protecting public health. For almost 20 years, EPA has operated at the intersection of science and public policy, forwarding some 250 rules a year to OMB for review, engaging questions of health and economics every week. Building on the historic legacy of its outstanding early leaders, Bill Ruckelshaus and Russ Train and Doug Costel, EPA has been associated with, has played a major role in, an outstanding series of achievements of public policy during an era that did not know many comparable successes. But it has not been enough. Take the Great Lakes. What more needs to be done? Well, first, the nation needs to confront the single largest failure of our water quality improvement efforts, a problem as familiar in 1969 as it is in 1989. And that problem is runoff. The water that carries the soils and builds the sediment, that transports the oil and the farm chemicals, the pollution that misses the treatment plants. Runoff, or non-point source pollution, constitutes half of our nation's water quality problem, and the answer to it must remain primarily a local or state responsibility. A second problem confronting the Great Lakes and other waters is toxics, many of which are being carried on the air, even PCBs. Many of these toxics were not understood 20 years ago. Some couldn't even have been detected then. Now we know that toxics are pervasive. They pass from air to water, from land to groundwater, and back freely. As for the DDT that's showing up in the lakes, it appears to be coming from Central and South America, transported long distance on the air, having been banned in the early 70s in the United States by EPA. President Bush has proposed controls on air toxics that would reduce them by some 80% nationwide through new technology requirements. And we are working with Central American governments to promote greater care in use of pesticides. But still, we need a more coherent and comprehensive approach. One reason such an approach is needed is that this country is headed straight into a crisis of waste disposal. I don't use the word crisis lightly, and we're not in one yet, but a third of our landfills will be obsolete within 5 years, and virtually all of them obsolete within 20. Contrary to some reports, there is an emerging consensus on waste management in this country, and it is this: we all agree that waste should be picked up. And increasingly, we agree also that it should not be put down again. And yet, I can't help sensing an opportunity in this. Some weeks ago, I visited my hometown of Decatur, Illinois, which, like so many other communities, is running out of landfill capacity. The local newspaper reported that the city is considering entering into a contract with a local company that would take their waste and burn it to produce energy in a processing plant for farm products. But the city confronts a dilemma. They can't decide whether to pay the company for disposing of their waste or to charge the company for supplying it with fuel. Now, I sense an opportunity in the contemporary confusion. As someone said back around the time of the first Earth Day, a pollutant is merely a resource out of place. My Decatur story illustrates that truth, I think, precisely. They're not sure whether what they've been carting to landfills is waste or fuel. And so let's look for new and imaginative ways to keep resources from winding up as pollutants. Let's make prevention of pollution the guiding philosophy of waste management. Let's assert a hierarchy of values that begins with pollution prevention and then moves to waste minimization and recycling, and only as a last resort to treatment and to cleanup. This philosophy has profound implications for the nation's environmental laws and programs. If we take it beyond voluntary efforts, and I propose to, then we will ask new questions of our laws. We will ask whether industrial processes cannot be designed to recapture materials that now go up the chimney or out through the pipe. And we will refashion our regulations to create powerful new incentives to prevent pollution. Already, some corporations are implementing programs that significantly reduce pollution of various sorts, and particularly air toxics. Monsanto, 3M, Dow, and others have set in place programs designed to reduce by a very large percentage certain kinds of waste products. I commend and encourage such efforts. I believe all of us, as individuals, as industrialists, as environmental group members, as government regulators, increasingly should ask new and meaningful questions about resources. Questions like, is this waste avoidable? Is there a better, less polluting process by which to manufacture this product? How will this product be used? How will this product be disposed of? All across the country, people are increasingly aware that as a society, we simply waste too much. Other countries, like West Germany and Japan, waste half or a third of what we do per capita, and they are productive, competitive, and successful. We can do better. A new ethical awareness of nature, its needs, and our responsibility is aborning in America. As President Bush said in Spokane, through millions of individual decisions, simple, everyday, personal choices, we are determining the fate of the earth. So the conclusion is also simple. We're all responsible, and it's surprisingly easy to move from being part of the problem to being part of the solution. The impulse to improve is there. People and their communities want information, programs, guidance about recycling, for example, and they are prepared to act. I mentioned that we need to ask a new set of questions. A religious order of sisters recently inquired of EPA about the enforcement histories of several corporations. They're considering investing their school endowment in the company's stock, and they wanted to know if they were environmentally responsible companies. Well, such calls are becoming more and more familiar at EPA. Green growth, as the London Economist recently wrote, green growth can be good growth. And the Financial Times has predicted a boom in green consumer products. And returning once again to the Great Lakes, what else can we do once we've applied all of the end-of-pipe controls we know how to apply? That's today's question for the lakes. What we can do is reduce the sheer volume of waste products to a level that will allow both the lakes and the nation's resources to be treated as sustainable. That philosophy of sustainable development, which once we considered appropriate only to the developing countries, applies also to us. For in too many ways, we also are living off nature's depletable capital instead of her renewable interest. If we ask the question, can this pollution be prevented? We should also be prepared to ask a follow-up question. If it cannot, where in the cycle of use and waste is the point of most effective control? In other words, where should we confront and control a pollutant for maximum environmental benefit?